breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcast, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of murder and suicide. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, Joe.
Hello, Lizzie. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well.
Well, I understand you've been doing a little bit of light reading, shall we say, in Cold Blood by Truman Capote.
I have. I'm going to hold that up in the Penguin Classic Edition for those watching on YouTube. That's a novel that's been around, a non-fiction book. It's been around for a very long time and it's been sitting on my shelf and I haven't read it. But I thought I should for the purposes of this podcast.
Why?
Well, it's about a multiple murder in the United States in the 50s. And Truman Capote, he's actually a novelist and journalist. So he wrote Breakfast at Tiffany's. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and that's a little novella. It's a lovely story.
Hold on, he's our murderer.
No, he is the journalist that was sent to cover it.
Right.
And he then wrote a book about it.
Okay.
And it has become the second biggest selling true crime book ever.
Wow.
Yeah, published in 1966. The only book that has outsold it in terms of true crime is a book published in 1974 called Helter Skelter about the Charles Manson murders.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so maybe we'll have to do a show on that book as well.
I actually used Charles Manson as the character in one of my Toot questions last week.
Wow.
Yes.
I wonder if any of the students know who he is.
Well, some of them did not, which is one of the reasons I think it's good we're doing these cases from the past, because I think we still have a lot to learn about, the criminal mind and the depravity of what people can do. So it's good to have them in the consciousness.
Oh, I hope so. I mean, hopefully we'll get to it because I think, this case does have something to say about, the insanity defense. And it was certainly a case that was in the media in the United States in the late 60s and became part of the arguments that have kicked around in the United States about getting rid of the death penalty. So,
okay.
Yeah. So I'll just briefly talk about the book. So published in 66, Truman Capote is a writer for the New Yorker magazine, and it's actually published as a series of 4 articles in late 65, gets put into book form in 66, instant bestseller.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's a dream, isn't it?
I know. It's apparently made sort of $6 million,
Back then.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's about a murder that occurs back in 1959. In mid-November 1959 of a family. And it's a pretty horrible murder and just so inexplicable, which hopefully we'll get to.
Sorry, just to get the context, which city are we in? So
the murder occurs not in a city but in a very small town called Holcomb, and it's in Kansas.
Okay.
Now, I've heard about Kansas. We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto, that famous line from Wizard of Oz. So I sort of understood it was a rural state, but I sort of pulled it up and had a look on the map. It's seriously the dead center of the United States and apparently incredibly flat and, wheat growing country and very rural. So this small rural town of Holcomb, it's the Clutter family. There's 4 members that are murdered. So there's Herb Clutter, the husband, he's 48. Bonnie Clutter, the wife, she's 45. Nancy Clutter, daughter, she's 16. And Kenyon Clutter, boy, 15.
Wow.
They're 2 older daughters, so they actually had 4 children, but the 2 older daughters had, one of them had married and had a child and was living with her elsewhere with a new husband, and the other daughter was engaged and living in another city. So they weren't there and they obviously survived this absolute massacre that occurs.
Oh, okay.
I'll just briefly give you the murder and then I'll talk about some of the characters involved, because that's one of the great things about the book, the way that Truman Capote really explores the characters, including the murderers and, what their lives were like. So it does give you a very sort of holistic picture of all of the people involved.
I think that's so important, because sometimes when you listen to true crime or read about true crime, there's so much focus on the offender,
Mm.
but we have to remember the importance of the victims and their lives. Yeah, so that's good. Take it away.
So the murderers were Dick Hickok, Richard Hickok, he's 31, and Perry Smith, who's 28. And they weren't from Holcomb. They were from Kansas, but Dick Hickok was, but from another part of Kansas. Kansas, like a number of the American states, seems to be a very big state. So they lived in a town, or Dick Hickok did, 400 miles, which is 643 kilometres away from Holcomb.
And I don't want to detract from the seriousness of this, but what were his parents thinking? Dick Hickok.
Wow, okay. Well, I mean, I was interested in the name Kenyon Clutter. It's like Canyon except with a K and an E.
I know, but at least it doesn't have that. Like, I can't take him seriously now. Dick Hickok.
Dick Hickok. Well, why don't I just call him Dick, and then we won't...
Sounds perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly why these two men commit the murder, I'll probably talk about, but I'll just give you a bit of their backstory. So Dick Hickok is 31. He has been married twice, and he has 3 children to 2 different women. He's married at 19, divorced, I think, by sort of 25, 26.
Was he still married to the second wife?
No, I think that divorce had gone through as well.
Okay.
But at the time of the murders, he's living at home with his parents. They had a small farm. Were quite poor, you know, sort of just managed to make ends meet. And he was working there, but he was living there, and he was working in the local town as a mechanic. That's what he was sort of trying to do. But he had worked as a number of things, including as an ambulance driver years before when he was first married. And he'd had a bad car accident as an ambulance driver, including a very bad head injury. And if you look at photos of him, which you can see online, you can see that his eyes don't exactly line up. Sort of one side of his face looks like it's slightly lower than the other.
After the accident.
And there's some real questions that come up later at the trial about whether he'd had what we would call now an acquired brain injury and how much that affected him.
Which, that's so interesting, because that was like one of the couples who kill. The offender in that case had a head injury.
Yeah, that was it was in the 40s, wasn't it? He'd had a bad head injury during the war.
Yeah.
Perry Smith is younger. He's only 28. He'd never been married and never been in a serious relationship. He'd had a very difficult upbringing. His parents, interestingly, were trick riders, horse riders, and they would go around all of the rodeos. And his mother was from the Cherokee Nation. Father was also a trick rider, white American, and they had met and fallen in love. And in some sense, sounds like a great romance. They'd had children, and then the Depression comes, and there's not a lot of money in trick riding. And also, they'd both received a number of injuries from riding and really had gotten a bit too old to do it. So, they then struggled to make ends meet. They were living in a car or in a big van.
With the family.
With, how many kids did they have? They had 4 children, and Perry's the youngest. And so the marriage breaks down. The mother is an alcoholic. She takes the children, but she can't really care for them. And certainly Perry, as the youngest, he gets put into, what we'd call a foster home. But so it's like an institutional home run by nuns, and they were not good to him.
No, that seems to be fairly common of those kinds of institutions back then.
Yeah, very sad life. His eldest brother, who sort of made sure he went to school, made sure he got a good education, got married. His wife committed suicide, and he then committed suicide.
Oh my goodness!
Within, he came home, found her dead. He committed suicide. So his older brother dies. His next older sister, she effectively becomes a prostitute. She becomes an alcoholic as well, and she dies from falling from a window. And there's some suggestion that it might have been suicide as well.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And has the dad
disappeared? Well, I mean, I think they could find him if they wanted to, but he went to Alaska, and he was a mad one for panning for gold in Alaska and doing things like that.
So absent, he wasn't.
He was absent. Although Perry eventually sort of runs away effectively and finds his father, and Perry lives with his father for a number of years, and they live in the bush, and they pan for gold and trap animals, and there's really quite rural sort of
Self-sufficient.
Yeah.
That's quite a childhood.
Yeah. And
Yes.
it's only the other his only other sister who has a normal life. She gets married, has children, settles down, marries a sort of a good husband who treats her well.
Okay.
And she really doesn't want to have anything to do. She writes a letter to actually Perry when he's in jail, and he gets very upset by it, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with her. And
was it condemning what he'd done?
well, it was just telling me, sort of maybe you should take a good hard look at yourself kind of letter. I mean, they set the letter out in the book so you can hear it, and it's not too bad, but Perry, I think, was pretty paranoid and very sensitive to criticism.
All right, so he's got disadvantage in his past,
but well, we might get to the diagnosis that they get prior to their trial in terms of an insanity defence later. But so where do they meet? Because Perry sort of roams around and Dick is living in Kansas. They meet in prison in Kansas.
Of course they do.
Yes.
Where else?
Dick is picked up for passing bad checks. So he writes a check that he doesn't have the money for. He's eventually picked up. Perry, in a completely separate incident with some other person, it gets involved in a break and enter. Gets caught, is put in jail on remand, escapes, and he's not picked up for another 12 months. He's finally picked up, and they're both sentenced and go to jail.
Wow, for first-time offences.
Yeah. Sorry, I think Dick had an earlier minor offence he hadn't gone to jail for.
Right.
I don't think Perry had any. Oh, sorry, he had a lot of minor offences as a young kid because he was living on the streets for some of it.
This is what we say, isn't it? If you send people to prison, they're likely to come out a better criminal with contacts in that area.
Well, it gets worse in terms of the contacts. So they end up sharing a cell. Perry tells Dick a story that he'd once killed a man with a bike chain, beaten a man to death with a bike chain. Apparently that story's not true, and the police checked out whether the story's true, couldn't find it. Perry later said it wasn't true.
Weird.
Flex. Well, I suppose you're in jail. You want to make yourself look tough so you're not beaten up by other
So
people.
I'm a killer. Great.
Dick's very impressed by this and decides if he needs to do a job that will involve killing, he wants Perry.
Well, it's got a proven
track record. So Perry ends up finishing a sentence and leaving the jail. Dick is then put in a cell with another bloke who, petty criminal, was in there for some, sort of minor offences. He had worked for Herb Clutter.
Oh.
Years before. So we're talking now that this is in 1958, early 59, and this bloke had worked for Herb Clutter in 1949. It's almost 10 years earlier.
But obviously didn't like him.
No, that's the ridiculous thing. Really liked him.
What?
Apparently Herb Clutter was the nicest guy, paid his employees well, treated them well, gave them bonuses at Christmas time, gave them time off if they needed it. Really good employer. Everybody loved him. And this guy also loved him. But in the course of shooting the breeze, I don't know, when he's lying in his cell, he says that Herb Clutter was a wealthy and prosperous farmer.
Greed.
And so Dick Hickok says, does he have a safe? And this bloke says he thought he did. So one of in the house on the farm where the family lived, one room that you can get to that has its own door to the outside, is Herb Clutter's office. And so the employees would sometimes be in there, and he said he thought he saw a safe in the corner. And he remembered having a conversation with Herb Clutter at one stage where Herb Clutter said something like he'd had to spend $10,000 on something. So Dick Hickok gets it in his brain that Herb Clutter has a safe with $10,000 in it. He then gets as much detail as he can about the farmhouse.
Was there a safe? Oh, sorry.
Well, no. That's one of the terrible things.
Sorry.
There's no safe. And the great irony is that Herb Clutter is actually known as a person who never carries cash.
Oh, my God.
In Holcomb, they made a joke about how he would write a check for a haircut because he didn't like carrying cash. So it's not even that there isn't safe. It's the exact opposite of what this guy says.
No chance of money being there.
None. But so Dick Hickok gets this idea in his head that he wants to do this robbery. And he gets as much detail as he can off this guy, particularly about the layout of the house, how many people live there. And he says to this guy, I'm going to rob that place and I'm going to kill everybody in the house So there are no witnesses. Yeah, makes it quite plain.
Okay, well, if I was that guy he was talking to, I'd be terrified.
Well, probably not for himself, but...
If he's going to kill all the witnesses, surely he's going to kill anyone who knows the plan.
Interesting, yeah. They don't obviously kill that bloke, and they live to regret it later.
Yeah, that was a mistake on their part.
Yes. So the other guy just thinks it's sort of jail talk. Anyway, so Dick Hickok has this plan. He wants to rob the place, get $10,000, gets out, gets in contact with Perry, says, I've got this big score. We should do this job. It's an absolute guaranteed cert. Makes it clear to Perry that he wants to kill everybody in the house, knowing that there are these young people in the house.
Or knowing there's anybody, like planning to kill anybody. Anyway.
So Perry comes up to where Dick lives. They, 24 hours later, get the family shotgun, buy some rope to tie people up with, buy some tape to tape people's mouths, drive 400 miles, 643 kilometres. They leave on a Saturday at lunchtime and they're back at their place on Sunday lunchtime.
Sorry, can I just check? It wasn't Dick who had the brain injury, potentially.
It was Dick who had the brain injury.
It was.
Yes. Perry had actually also had bad injury in a motorcycle accident where his legs were badly broken. And so he was addicted to aspirin. Yeah. And he couldn't really run much and he couldn't walk and his legs would ache.
Okay. All right. So Dick has the brain injury, potentially.
Yes. So Perry is at all times pretty resistant to the idea of killing people, but he goes along with it. Anyway, so they drive all night, all day and all night. They arrive at the Clutter house at about midnight. Okay, so that's Saturday midnight. What had the Clutters been doing that day? So ordinary day on the farm, doing farm work, except in the afternoon, Herb Clutter, the local insurance agent, had come over and had a long meeting with Herb Clutter about signing life insurance. And this insurance agent had been talking to Herb about it for a long time. Herb, a very sensible and cautious businessman, had thought about it. He finally decided he was going to sign life insurance. Signs that afternoon a massive life insurance policy.
Who were the beneficiaries?
Beneficiaries are his children.
Okay.
Well, I suppose his wife also, if he predeceases her. Then Saturday night, Nancy says, can I go out? You know, my boyfriend's just called up and asked if I'll go to the movies. Herb Clutter says no, but if he wants, he can come over. So he lives next door on a farm is 3 miles away.
Yeah.
So the boyfriend comes over. They sit and watch TV, completely ordinary night. The boyfriend leaves 11 p.m. So the last people to see the family alive are the insurance agent and the boyfriend.
I wonder what happened to him, what he went on to do, because he was spared. Like that is so close for him, isn't it?
Oh, unbelievable. So these two arrive after having driven 400 miles in the dead of night. They managed to find the place, unbelievably, because they don't have a map and they don't have Google,
It is just bizarre, this single-minded purpose to pick this person so far away to target.
Well, they both had these ideas that with this big score, they were both going to go and start these businesses, which they could then be legitimate sort of people in the community.
Deluded.
I know, it was completely deluded. Every time they managed to get some money, they just absolutely blow it on food, alcohol, and prostitutes. Anyway, but they have these ideas that this will be the score and then they can all go straight. They can go legit.
Sure.
So they find the house. It's got a driveway, which is about 1 kilometre long, beautiful tree-lined driveway. Turn the lights off, drive at the driveway. Now, they can do that because it's a full moon and apparently a beautiful night, really still, cold night, completely flat plains. See clearly because of the full moon.
What month are we?
We're in November in Kansas.
Winter.
So, I think that's right at the end of autumn, wouldn't it be? And, about to start winter.
Okay.
Now, there's actually another family that live on the farm.
Oh.
There's a worker who lives there with his family. And he's in a house a couple of 100 yards from the Clutter's house, but there's a barn in between the two houses. And he and his wife were actually awake that night because one of their kids was sick. Anyway, so they don't hear what goes on, which is, I suppose, in some sense, a bit unbelievable. Apparently there was a wind blowing, so there was a bit of wind noise. But also the Clutters had a dog which would bark. but it was really scared of guns. If it ever saw a gun, it'd just scarper. And again, it was something everyone in the town knew. They'd all laugh about this dog who was so gun shy. So nobody knows why the dog doesn't bark. Perry and Dick don't even see a dog. They pull up.
So it's not killed or anything?
No, they pull up, get out of the car, never see a dog. The dog's found the next day by people sort of halfway down the driveway, sort of cowering.
Oh.
So just these amazing coincidences of things that happen.
But definitely the worker had nothing to do with it.
No, worker had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
So then, of course, it's the 1950s in, rural America. Nobody locks anything. So they just go to the door of the office, go into the office, look around, can't find a safe. So they go, well, I might tell you later what happens, but they eventually get all of the family, tie them all up.
They could have just left.
They could have just left. Well, they decided that there was a safe and they wanted to find out where it was. So they woke up Herb Clutter.
Wow.
Started asking about the safe. So I'll cut to what happens the next day. So Herb Clutter is a Methodist, and he is, a important man in the Methodist community. Regularly attends church on a Sunday. Had helped raise the money to build the beautiful Methodist church in the next biggest town along called Garden City. And he would go every Sunday to church, and he would take two other girls, Nancy Clutter's best friend and then one of the neighbour's daughters.
As in with his family as well?
With his family as well.
Okay.
So what would happen is that the next door neighbour's dad would drop the neighbour daughter over.
Oh, wow.
The family and that daughter would get in the car, drive into Holcomb, pick up
the friend,
drive into Garden City, go to church.
No.
So the neighbour arrives with his daughter. He stays in the car because he's in his work gear. He doesn't feel like he's dressed to go inside. She goes inside. The back door's open. She sees that the telephone lines have been cut. She sees that Mrs. Clutter, Bonnie Clutter's purse is on the floor and it's of the kitchen, and it's been rifled through. Otherwise doesn't notice anything out of place. Calls out, nobody says anything. Comes back out to her dad, says this is all a bit strange. He says, this is strange. Let's go to the other girl's house, Nancy's best friend's house, ask her if she's heard anything.
Oh, he didn't go in?
They don't go in. They drive to Nancy's best friend's house, who says, I haven't heard anything. They haven't spoken to me. Phones the house. Obviously no answer because the lines are cut. They then all get in the car. They take one of the neighbours there. So two men and these two girls, young 16-year-old girls turn up. And the men and the two 16-year-olds go into the house.
All of them?
No. At first, it's just the two 16-year-olds. And I think one of the men goes into the office.
Wow.
And so these poor 16-year-old girls walk into the house, walk up the stairs. So the house is set out like this. There's the office, the kitchen, lounge room, TV room, and master bedroom on the ground floor. Downstairs of the house is a sort of a rumpus room and a boiler room where the heater is. Upstairs in the house are 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. So they go up the stairs. The first bedroom at the top of the stairs is Nancy's bedroom. They open the door and they see Nancy lying on the bed, having with a fatal shotgun wound to the head, and they immediately scream, run out of the house, and they tell the men what they've seen. One of the men then goes and finds Bonnie, the mother, in one of the other upstairs bedroom, and she has been shot in the head. They go down into the
basement.
The basement, the rumpus room. They find Kenyon Clutter lying on a couch. He's been shot in the head. And in the boiler room, they find Herb Clutter, and he's had his throat cut.
Oh.
He's been stabbed, and he's been shot in the head. All of them were tied, and all of them had tape over their mouths.
That is horrendous.
It is absolutely horrendous. So, yeah.
So presumably they overpowered them all, tied them up, taped their mouths, and then killed them, because if they'd killed one, the others would have heard.
Well, I might talk about how the police approached it, because without explaining exactly what happened, because these are the kinds of questions that the police have to ask. So police are called, they turn up. It's too much for the local police. So we've talked in these podcasts about the United States, local police, state police, federal police. Okay, so it's too much for the local police. So in Kansas, they have a state detective, branch. So the Kansas detective branch, whatever, takes over. And the detective who runs it was the sheriff of the town of Holcomb. Then he became a detective and working for the state police and was based out of Garden City, but knew Herb Clutter well and knew, the family.
The family.
So obviously he's, deeply personally involved, and it was a small community, and so everybody's incredibly affected by this. So he looks at it, and there is the cartridges from the gun have been picked up. So they assume from the wounds it's a shotgun, but they don't know. And they don't know the motive. So they can't see what's been stolen, except that there's no cash in the purse and that Herb Clutter's wallet also has no cash in it. It's in his bedroom.
He doesn't have cash.
He actually did. He had sort of $30. I think all up they got about $50.
Oh, that's worth it.
Yeah. They can't sort of understand what the motive is because nothing else is stolen. And so they assume that it's somebody who has a grudge against Herb Clutter. Now, remember, this is back in the day before DNA. It wasn't before fingerprints, but what are you dusting for fingerprints? You don't have a gun. I suppose you could dust every surface.
The tape?
I suppose you could have dusted the tape. What they do get is next to Herb Clutter's body is a bloody boot print. So somebody's stepped in blood and left the boot print. And also when the police photographer comes and takes photographs of the scene, in the photographs you can see in the dust another boot print. You couldn't see it with the naked eye apparently, but it comes up. So they have two different boot prints.
So if that was CSI, they would run that through their spectromograph or whatever they've got and identify
who the person
who the people were.
Yeah.
Did that not happen?
No. So all they have are these two boot prints. So what they assume is that there's at least two. And that's consistent. It would be hard if you're one person to
overpower everyone
and tie them up. You can have one person holding the gun, the other person doing the tying. So they think it's two. But they decide that because it's not really a robbery, it must be somebody who has a grudge against Herb Clutter.
So they were looking in the wrong direction from the start.
Yeah, and they think it's someone local. So they don't really have any idea of what's going on.
And so you'll probably tell me, but did anybody see Perry and Dick driving?
No, because they arrive at midnight, they leave at sort of 2 a.m. and, by the time the sun comes up, they are,
well and truly
hundreds
gone.
of miles away.
Unfortunate it wasn't like a Ted Bundy situation where they had a traffic infringement or something.
Yeah. Well, later on they finally get detected through some pretty...
okay. All right.
So they go on the run after they've been driving for an hour or so. They stop and get rid of the cartridges.
And the gun?
Not the gun. Perry has blood all over him, and so he washes himself up. I think they burn the shirt that he had on, clean the gun, it had blood on it. And then they keep going. Arrive home lunch the next day.
And do we know, so they've got $50.
$50.
They've just killed 4 people. What are their moods like? Do they think, what a great night, or are they...
Apparently they were joking about it in the car ride afterwards.
I was afraid you'd say that.
Yeah. They speed away, arrive back in this town 400 miles away. Dick just goes home to his family, arrives at what they call dinner time, but what we would call lunchtime, sit down, eats with the family, watches a basketball game. His dad notes that he's incredibly hungry and notes that he falls asleep in front of the basketball, which apparently he would never do. They're the only two things of note.
He's had a busy time, hasn't he?
He has. Only two things of note in his personality. Leans the shotgun up in the corner of the, in the lounge room.
What?
Yeah. Apparently that's where it was kept.
Okay.
So Perry's staying nearby in a motel, but they've decided that they're going to leave. So Monday, they just pack up the car and disappear. Dick doesn't say goodbye to his parents or his, was it sister or brother, just goes. And they go, and the idea is that they're going to go to Mexico.
Because they're afraid they'll get caught?
They're not actually that afraid they'll get caught. Mostly the Mexico trip is because Perry wants to buy a big boat and start a game fishing charter.
With what?
Well, that was the whole point. They were going to get the money from the
But they
safe.
don't have the money.
I know they don't have the money, but they decide they'll go to Mexico anyway and see how it goes.
They are stupid.
Yeah. So on the way to Mexico, they need money. So they stop and Perry does his passing false checks where he either gets cash or he gets a whole lot of goods. Right. So they have some cash, they have a whole lot of goods, they go to Mexico, they then sell off the goods.
I'm sure it wasn't enough for a boat.
Wasn't enough for a boat, but it was enough for a good time. They had a great time in Mexico.
Oh, yay for them.
And they went out on fishing charters and they met some people and had a whale of a time. Anyway, cut to just before Christmas. So murders occur in November. Just before Christmas, they're, again, flat broke. They actually sell the car. And they actually sell 2 other items which help convict them.
Oh, what?
Besides the money that from the Clutter's house, they also take a radio. They take Kenyon's radio, little transistor radio.
Okay.
And they take Herb's binoculars. He had a great set of binoculars in his office.
That is so random.
The police knew about the radio being taken, but they didn't know about the binoculars until later.
Was this at a time when radios were a novelty?
Oh, I think probably small transistor radios were.
Right.
Oh, I mean.
That's such a weird thing to take.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, I suppose if you don't have a radio, the only time you can listen to it is if you're in the car and the car is on. If you have a transistor radio, you can listen to it whenever you want.
Out of a whole house full of things, a transistor radio and binoculars is very...
Yeah, but it's a family home. I mean, these 2 aren't family guys. What are they?
Yeah, okay.
They end up having to sell everything and then hitchhike their way back to the States. They decide what they're going to do is they're going to flag down a car.
Kill the driver?
Correct.
Oh, my God.
They need a car with a single driver and they want a nice car. So they keep hitchhiking. Like truckers will pull up and they're like, no, don't worry about it. And the truck keeps driving. And, their family will pull up and they go, nah. Anyway, finally a guy pulls up and goes, oh, do you want a lift? And they go, yep, great. They jump in the car. The plan is that Perry sits in the back seat, Dick sits in the front seat. Perry has a giant rock in his hand.
Oh, my God.
At the given signal, he belts the guy in the head, kills him.
They take the car.
Take the car.
Sorry. And also, because I haven't Googled them, would they look scary to pick up? Like, that's a lot of people stopping for them.
Yeah. No, Perry sort of looked like a jockey, apparently. He was quite short
Right.
but quite muscular, his upper body, because his legs were pretty mangled. Dick wasn't a big guy. And they both look pretty young if you look at the pictures online.
So not scary.
Not scary at all. And Dick was very smooth. He was a great talker. He's a confidence trickster, can pass lots of false checks.
Yeah, okay.
They get in this car. They're driving along with this bloke. Dick's having a great chat to him. They're swapping jokes, blah, blah, blah. The guy's a traveling salesman. They get to the point where Dick gives the signal to
Perry,
just as the guy sees another hitchhiker and pulls over
No.
and, yes, picks up another hitchhiker. And so the guy survives, unbelievably.
That is sliding doors.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So anyway, they eventually steal another car. They change the number plates over. Dick goes to a wreckers and takes another set of plates.
Or they
puts it on.
didn't have to kill someone.
No, they didn't have to kill someone. They just stole
Okay.
it. I think the keys were in it.
Right.
And then they go on this spree of passing false checks. Now, back to the Kansas Detective Bureau. So they're at a complete loss. They don't know what to do about this case. All the leads are running dry. All they're doing is going back through the past employees of Herb Clutter, trying to find something. Because they're looking for somebody who might have had a grudge.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I should say, the poor old boyfriend, he was their first suspect.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so not only does he wake up the next morning.
But he must have been very young.
He was 16.
Wow.
And so he wakes up the next morning after the murder and he's told that his girlfriend, who he had literally seen the night before, had been murdered.
Dead.
And yeah, he just is obviously completely broken, the poor kid.
Wow.
He's then taken in by the police and they put him on a polygraph.
Oh, my goodness.
They interview him and then on a separate occasion polygraph him. Their lead detective's pretty confident pretty early on he's not the murderer, but they polygraph him.
So he
anyway.
wasn't like held in custody or anything?
No.
Okay.
They also polygraph another guy because of the way the knots were tied. They find a local farmer who, was in the Navy and tied similar kinds of knots, and they polygraph him.
Sounds like a pretty thorough. Like they were doing what they could to investigate.
Yeah.
I don't know why they do the polygraphs. Like they're not admissible in court.
No.
Stress impacts
Yeah.
the results. Like it seems such a silly waste of time to
Yeah.
do them.
Yeah,
but I think
but
they
I mean,
still offer them.
Yeah. I mean, they obviously put a lot of faith in them because they then stop investigating
I
particular
know,
people.
luckily for them.
Yeah.
But it can so easily go the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
So they, come to sort of just before Christmas, they are struggling. They've got no leads. They don't know where to go. And then the guy from jail who'd given them the idea about robbing Herb Clutter's place, he hears it on the radio, or he had heard on the radio, that the Clutters had been murdered. And he went, oh, my Lord, I know exactly who's done that. Now, he doesn't want to tell anyone because he's in jail and doesn't want to be seen as what we would call a dog, what they call a snitch. So he actually waits a few weeks before he says anything. Then he finally tells another prisoner, who then organises for him to have a private meeting with the governor of the jail, tells the governor. So the police finally have names. And it does seem to fit in the sense that there's no motive for the murder, but now they're given a motive, and it's out of towners, which doesn't fit their theory of the case, but
could
does
work.
Yeah.
So I mean, that prisoner, yes, he waited a couple of weeks, but that's pretty incredible that he told.
Yeah. Well, he really liked Herb Clutter.
Yeah.
He becomes a witness at the trial.
But
he collects the $1,000
the reason
reward.
that they got murdered.
I know, but I mean, his point was, I just thought it was jail talk. I didn't think they were actually going to do it. And Dick Hickok wasn't in for murder. He was in for
Yeah, but
petty larceny.
I think after Dick said, "I'm going to go rob the safe and kill everyone," he should have sent an anonymous warning to Herb.
Dropped him a note.
Yes.
I mean, that probably would have worked. All Herb Clutter had to do was lock his doors. I mean, they couldn't get in. Were they going to kick the door down? I don't know.
Possibly, but might have made it harder. He might have been more alert, might have had a gun next to the bed, whatever.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a proponent of guns in homes.
No.
But.
So they're on the lookout for these two, and Dick and Perry are back in Kansas, and they run the whole false check thing again. And luckily, one of the shop attendants is curious enough to write down the number plate of the car that they get in and a description.
Wow.
So when it comes to when there's complaints to the police, they get the name and they get the car and the registration. So they put out an all points bulletin, APB, for the car. Now, meanwhile, Perry and Dick have gone to Florida because they want to spend Christmas in Florida.
They're having a lovely time.
Great time. They've got money now because they've just done a whole lot more passing false checks gig. And they go down and rent a place, in a hotel by the beach and sit by the beach. So
by this stage, the police know
that
they're probably involved, but they haven't released that information publicly.
No, none of it is public.
Okay.
But all of the police, in a whole lot of the states are aware. But listen, this just indicates how old this stuff is. So nowadays, police have scanners on their car, and the scanner automatically scans number plates of cars that are, they're driving past, and will give them the alerts. Back in the day, the police officers had to memorize the number plates of cars that they were looking for, and these two are driving around in a town in Florida. And one of the police officers recognizes a number plate from memory. Isn't that incredible?
That is.
So
that is old school police.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So they're arrested. They think they're arrested for a breach of parole. Okay.
Right.
Because they're not supposed to be hanging around to, one of the parole conditions was not associate with other criminals. So they're in breach of parole for that. But I think that they hadn't been reporting. So they, know they're in breach of parole for that.
So
what they don't know, is that the Kansas Detective Bureau is right onto them, and these detectives come down to this small town in Florida to interview them. Now, the interviewing techniques, they're immediately kept separately, and the interviewing techniques are interesting. It's pretty typical police interviewing techniques. But so they go in and they have these long interviews with them where they get them both to talk and talk and talk and talk. They don't challenge what they're saying. And Dick admits to all of this passing false checks. They sort of say, oh, you've been passing false checks, and give him some of that information. So he thinks that that's what he's there for. So he gives this long and involved story about passing false checks, and he gives a story. They sort of get him to talk about from the moment he and Perry got together outside of jail.
What had they done?
Yeah, to now. And so he gives this long and involved story about how on the night of, Saturday the 14th of November, they had gone to a town, to visit Perry's sister. She hadn't been there. They'd hooked up with 2 girls, had a night on the booze, come home. And both of them had rehearsed that story. So both of them give the story.
Oh, they had?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they both give a pretty consistent account of what they did that night.
Maybe not as stupid as I thought.
No. Anyway, they do long interviews. Then the next day, they do interviews again. And, that's right. At the end of the first interview, they start saying things like, oh, do you know the Clutters? Have you been to Holcomb? All this kind of stuff. And so
they start
Perry
freaking
and
out.
Dick realise that they might be onto something. So they then halt the interviews there and restart it the next day.
Did either of them ask for a lawyer?
No. Well, yeah, I don't think they did. I'm assuming they were offered it.
Well, they wouldn't have had those rights necessarily back then, would they?
Really? I would have thought they would have. Right to a lawyer?
I don't know. We didn't get that crystallised in legislation until...
It was in the common law before that. You don't need it in legislation.
Okay.
So they certainly don't ask for lawyers.
Right.
Which might have helped them, they did. But anyway, so the problem is neither Dick or Perry can speak to each other because they're being held separately.
Yeah.
So they don't know if one of them's going to crack. Anyway, Dick cracks. And
Really?
Yep. And he admits it all. He says that Perry actually does all of the killing.
Of course.
And he gives a description of exactly what happened on that night.
So he says Perry did it all, but he was watching.
He was there. He was watching. They were there to steal
just
money.
As guilty. It makes no difference.
Yes, because he's encouraging, if nothing else. Perry, on the other hand, doesn't crack. They put a whole lot of this stuff to him. He doesn't admit to any of it. So then anyway, they've got one confession. They decide they're going to drive them. Again, this is an indication of how long ago it was. They had to drive them all the way back to Garden City, which is the town nearest Holcomb. So they're in the car. So there's 2 cars and there's sort of 3 police in each car plus one of the defendants. And on the drive back,
what?
The main detective who knew Herb Clutter says to Perry, oh, Dick told us that you once beat a man to death with a bike chain. And as soon as he says that, Perry realizes, yes, that
the guy in prison.
Well, no, he knows that Dick has actually confessed. Because they kept saying Dick's confessed, and he kept thinking, oh, the police are making this up. But as soon as the police say, oh,
he told Dick that story. Oh, yes, that's right.
Yes, so Perry immediately knows that Dick has actually. Anyway. So Perry then gives an account of it. And his account and Dick's account are almost the same except for one difference, which I'll get to.
I was going to say, except he said Dick did everything.
Yeah, correct. So I don't want to dwell too much on how terrible the actual murders are. But, I mean, I had the same reaction that you did when I heard about how the bodies were found. I was like, how did this actually occur? And it's all so sad when you hear it. So the Dick and Perry come into the house on the night of the murder, go into the office, can't find the safe, go to Herb Clutter's room, which they know is on that floor, the master bedroom, wake him up. He's dead asleep. He hadn't even heard anything. Wake him up with a shotgun, say, come with us. He sits, take him to the office, start questioning him about that. Meanwhile, probably Nancy wakes up upstairs. Perry hears somebody upstairs, walks to the foot of the stairs, looks up, can't hear anything. But he'd heard somebody walking around upstairs. They think it was Nancy because when they looked in Nancy's room, they found a gold bracelet or something of hers stuffed into the toe of a shoe. So they think she had heard that somebody's robbing the house and she had hidden her most valuable. Isn't that sad? So sad. I know. Anyway, they then ask her how much money he's got. He gives them the wallet. They take the money. They say, has your wife got any money? He said, probably not. They said, well, let's wake her up. She was sort of an invalid. The book says that she was an invalid because she had an anxiety disorder. I think I've seen some other suggestions that she had a very bad back or something, but certainly she spent a lot of time in her room. Okay. And anyway, it slept separately from her husband.
Oh, so, not even in the same room? Not even in the same room.
So they go upstairs to the room she sleeps in.
Okay.
Wake her up. She immediately starts crying. And the whole time Herb is trying to calm her down. These guys just want money. It's all right. Everything's fine. And he probably believes that, which is just so sad because he doesn't know that certainly Dick had already said he was going to kill them all.
Yeah.
Anyway, they eventually find that, the wife's got a couple of dollars, take that. And then they decide they're going to get all of the family up and they're going to hold them all separately and they're going to do a thorough search around the house. So they go and wake Kenyon up. He hadn't woken up. And they wake Nancy up and they get them all into the bathroom, and then they take them out one by one and tie them up.
In their own rooms.
In their own room. Well, sorry, Kenyon's taken downstairs. Yeah. So Nancy is tied up in her room. Now, Dick then says he's going to rape Nancy, and Perry says, no, you're not. And Perry says, if you do that, we'll fight. I'll have a fight. So they don't rape Nancy.
Oh.
Yeah. So that
was not what I expected Perry to say.
No. I think, actually, Herb Clutter's first. They take him downstairs and they tie him up, lying down on a bit of cardboard. They tie Kenyon up on the couch in the rumpus room downstairs. He's also lying down. And the police, when they came in, noticed a few things that they thought were a bit odd, because this big bit of cardboard had been put under Herb Clutter, which looked like they're trying to make him more comfortable. A pillow had been put under Kenyon's head, again, looking like it was making him more comfortable. Nancy had the covers pulled up over her. She's tied up in her own bed with the covers pulled up. The mother's tied up, with the covers pulled up. So they sort of thought that's a bit odd. And it turns out Perry was doing this because the whole time he didn't want to. He was like, we've tied them up. Let's leave them. Let's go. We can't find anything. Let's get out of here. He kept saying this kind of stuff.
Mr. Big Talk, who?
Yeah. Well, sorry. Dick was the one who was, I think, the big talker. I mean, Perry told the story about how he'd.
Well, that's why Dick picked him.
Yes. Anyway, so Dick was always like, no, we're going to have to kill him. We're going to have to kill him. Anyway, they eventually tie up all these people in all these different rooms of the house. And when that job is completed, they're downstairs standing next to Herb Clutter, and Perry says, okay, well, let's go. We don't have to do this. And Dick says no. And Perry says, okay, well, if you want to do it. No, if you want to do it, let's do it.
Oh.
And then he said he gets the knife and he walks over to Herb Clutter, and he was the whole time waiting for Dick to tell him to stop, and Dick never told him to stop. And he cuts Herb Clutter's throat.
Oh, my God.
And that doesn't kill him. So then Dick stabs him a couple of times. That doesn't kill him. So then they shoot him.
See, this is something I think needs to be told. It is hard to kill a person. Like, you think about that victim of David and Catherine Burney, who had her throat cut.
Yes.
And they were trying to bury her, and she sat up. So
yeah, that was in our episode on Couples Who Kill.
Couples Who Kill. It takes a lot of determination to kill a person, and so many people seem to. But how did these two found each other in prison? I know, but not everyone in prison is willing to kill. Like, this is bizarre to me.
Completely bizarre, and completely bizarre where it comes from. It just seems to emerge out of nowhere. Perry, the one who at all times said he didn't want to do it, is then the one who does it. He then goes. Poor Kenyon is sitting there having watched his father be stabbed and shot. Shoots Kenyon. Goes upstairs. Nancy has heard the two shots. Terrified. Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me.
Oh, stop.
Shoot her. Go in. Shoot the mum. Now, Perry says that Dick shoots Nancy and the mum. Anyway, later on when they write up the statements for them both to sign, Perry says, no, actually change my statement. I killed all of them.
Oh.
And I want to change my statement because I don't want Dick's mum, who he'd met, who was a lovely, gentle woman, to believe that her son actually killed anyone. I want her to know that he didn't kill anyone.
He is such a contradiction.
Isn't he?
Yeah.
So weird. They have these two confessions, but they want more evidence. So they find out what happened to the radio and the binoculars, and they go and retrieve those. So they've then can verify.
Concrete evidence.
Yeah, concrete evidence. Plus, they've got the boots. They find, unbelievably, that these two still have their boots that match the boot prints. So they've got that. And they put them on trial. They asked for the death penalty. The prosecutors asked for the death penalty. His reason is...
Hold on. So they pleaded not guilty?
They didn't enter a plea, and the court entered a plea of not guilty for them.
Oh, okay.
The prosecutor says he needs a death penalty to protect the community, because these people would never, if you ever release them at any time in their life, then they might kill people, which I just think is insane.
Well, not when you think about the fact there was zero reason to kill them.
Sure.
And they drove what was it, 800 miles.
Sure. But I mean, you release an old man, they're just physically not capable of.
But is it also about deterrence and sending that message?
It might. Well, the statistics are that the death penalty is not a huge
No, I know,
deterrent,
but that would be a...
Sure, but that's not what he says. He says he wants it because he doesn't want them to reoffend, to protect the community. Anyway, they run the trial. They're all duly convicted. Jury, who get the determination on whether it's life or the death penalty, vote for the death penalty.
Oh, they do?
Yeah. That all happens really quickly. So they're caught 6 weeks after the murder. And they are put on trial, by the end of 1960. So murder occurs November 1959, and they are caught, January 1960, and they are on trial and have their first appeal done before the end of 1960.
That is unheard of.
Isn't it unbelievable?
Day and age without court backlogs.
They're not hanged until April 1965 because there's a series of appeals because they then ask for the matter to be reviewed because they said they didn't get a fair trial. That's reviewed. Then there's they jump between state law and federal law. They say their rights under the Constitution of the United States have been infringed, so it becomes a federal issue. So they have 4.
Where'd the insanity come in?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I should have said that. So the defense counsel, all they're trying to do is avoid the death penalty. So they get a psychiatrist to review them both. And the psychiatrist says there might be some question marks here over Dick because of his head injury, and it sounds to me like Perry is bipolar. Further investigation needs to be looked at. But the state of Kansas had the McNaughton rule, which is that, so long as you understand the nature of what you're doing and so long as you understand that it's wrong, boom, you're guilty.
Yeah. Well, and also it has to be a recognised mental illness or natural mental infirmity. And I don't know what the law said on that, but we don't classify bipolar as a mental disease or natural mental infirmity in
Not
Queensland.
now, yeah. But it would have been interesting to hear what the jury made of it. The jury never heard that. Because the prosecution objected to the expert giving anything more than just answering those 2 questions. Did they understand the nature? Yes. Did they understand it was wrong? Yes. That's all he could say.
Well, and I think that's fair.
I don't think it's fair at all.
Why?
Well, I think particularly with Dick, who there's some evidence that he might have had some kind of impairment.
But if you still know that what you're doing is wrong.
Well, let's look at the nature of the impairment. I mean, they're not trying to excuse themselves from responsibility. They're trying to avoid the death penalty.
That's what the insanity defense does. You're found not guilty by reason of unsound mind, and you don't go to prison. You
go to a secure mental hospital, which is effectively the same.
Joe.
And you're held at Her Majesty's pleasure.
Unless and until you are deemed fit to be released.
Which could be forever.
Could be, but it isn't always.
No, correct.
But so it serves a specific purpose. And if you understand that what you're doing is wrong,
yes,
then I think you should be held liable.
Sure, but the other thing that the McNaughton rule I don't think countenance is this idea of a temporary insanity.
No.
So, we recognise that.
That was a long time to be temporarily insane. The drive there, the search, tying them up. Anyway, that's a different issue, perhaps.
It is. Anyway, so they are both convicted. Truman Capote and Harper Lee, his cousin, To Kill a Mockingbird. To Kill a Mockingbird. They went down and they arrived pretty soon after the murders, before the 2 had been caught, and they interviewed all of these people.
What a talented family.
Oh, yeah. But the characterizations of all of the people in the book, again, I'm holding it up in the Penguin Classic Edition, is just amazing. It's so well written, but it is such a traumatic story. I am never, ever going to reread it.
Right.
I'm glad I can say I've read it now.
Well, I want to read it.
If you want to read one of Truman Capote's work, can I suggest Breakfast at Tiffany's? Unless you really love your true crime, because it is a harrowing book to read. Okay.
Wow. Okay. So they were executed.
Executed in 1966. Long interviews with Truman Capote. He actually ended up he was an advocate against the death penalty because of this case. Yeah, so they were kept on death row for 4 or 5 years, and Truman Capote has long interviews with them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm not for the death penalty.
No.
But I'm pleased they weren't able to rely on the insanity defense.
Wow.
I think that's fair.
I'm against the death penalty, and I think that it should have been explored a bit more with the court so that maybe they could have avoided the death penalty.
Interesting. Gosh, Joe. Okay. Thank you.
No, not at all. Thanks, Lizzie.
Good one.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.